Hey everybody, or nobody right now, because I just started this. I'm going to start in a few minutes. I just changed the URL because I messed up. So I'll start in just a few minutes once some people have a chance to get in here. Till then, you can stare at me and stare out my window. Start in just a few minutes. I had to change the URL, so I have people going to the wrong spots. Classic technical difficulties. Hey guys, start in just a minute or so. Sorry about changing the URL. This is not the first time I've done that. Until then, you get a small tour of my house. This is my wall. It's my window. You can see my fence outside. Very exciting. All right, one more minute. All right, 30 seconds. Time to grab your coffee. Or many of you in Europe, maybe something different since it's already the afternoon. I got a request to show more of my house. I can show you the part that's easily accessible right now. So window, not the ugliest window in the house, but there is our ugly window. And let's see over here, another corner. There's my backpack. And that's kind of cool. There's my backyard. Also, you can see some laundry. But there is our backyard and my little shed. Yeah. So this is the back room of our house. This is where I go when I need to hide from things and get some work done. And it's really sunny in here, so it's a cool spot. Okay, now let's get started. So thank you, first of all, for everyone that's joining us on a Saturday to do this. We hear a lot that contributing is not always easy. I get it. Symfony's code base itself is quite complicated. So sometimes fixing a bug or reviewing a pull request isn't easy. Then you have Git, and you have cloning, and you have just knowing what to work on. So basically, what we're going to do is just review some issues, create a simple pull request, see what the process looks like. If you guys have questions, you can ask them on IRC. If you ping me with my name, it'll interrupt me, which is cool. So I will see your question, and you will see me be confused for a second while I read your question. And what was I going to say? Oh, and basically, this will be cool. I haven't practiced this a lot on purpose because we're going to go through the process organically together of the mistakes that I'm about to make, which should be fun. So first thing, let me share my screen. So goodbye, looking at me. There we go. If I, I'm going to share my screen. If you guys see any credit card information, I appreciate it. If you don't steal that, I'm kidding. Should be good. All right, so the first thing to know about contributing to Symfony is, first and foremost, it's not always about pushing code. So the first thing we need to go through is actually look at the issues. So one of the most important jobs that we need more than anything in Symfony is something we call a triager, basically somebody that looks at the issues and looks at the pull requests and does all of the hard work of reviewing them. So for example, if there's a bug, is the bug a valid bug? Can you repeat that bug? So let me look at a really good example here. Sorry, let me back up. So when you're on the issues of the Symfony repository, so github.com/symfony/symfony, you'll see a bunch of labels here. One of the labels starts with status. So see status : needs review. There's actually a bunch of labels that start with status. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these later, but let me scroll down. Status needs review, status needs work, status reviewed, and status works for me. This is a somewhat experimental system with how we manage the workflow of issues. And the most important thing is that if you want to come help Symfony, the status needs review is one of the most important places to go. The things that are in status needs review that haven't been confirmed, so you can also see their label here, and also pull requests that people need to review, either by reviewing the code or actually seeing that the pull request works. So this is the #1 entry point to go to. Now, when somebody submits an issue, what we usually want them to do is actually to create a fork of the Symfony standard repository and recreate their issue. Because one of the biggest things that takes time is when somebody has an issue, and actually let me look at a good example here. So the hardest thing is when somebody creates an issue, but they only have a few details about that issue, and it's very difficult for somebody from the core team to be able to see if that's a legitimate issue. And it takes a lot of time for them to, create a new project, try to set up their project just like your project and get things working. So if you, the person that opens the issue, or even us later for somebody else's issue, if we can basically create code to make it repeatable, that is like gold. Because once you can recreate and replicate the functionality, then everything is so much easier. So in this case, this is actually a really good issue request, and I won't go into the details of this, but you can look at it if you want to. But basically, give us a whole cloned Symfony standard repository, but there is all of the code laid out that shows exactly, here's exactly the code you need to set up. Here's my twig templates down here. Here's the exact result of like what happens. So he's given all the code so that we can like clearly understand it. So this is an example of a good issue, but a lot of times you'll have somebody come in with a lot less details. And if you can actually hold down and create a new project and try to use their explanations to get a full working code example. So basically, if you can take a worse description than this, someone that provides very little details, and actually turn it into a big, beautiful description like this. So in this example, if this were not a very good description, I might build a project, get these results, and then just bottom, I would just put those as a comment down here. Say, hey, here's the actual code you need to use to repeat this. Or even better, here is a cloned repository on GitHub that you can use to actually go and look at the code if you want to. That's even better than including the code examples right here. So we're going to go through an example of this before we actually get into making a pull request. So I'm going to go back to status needs review. And there we go. I'm sharing videos, so my internet is slow. And I'm actually going to look at this issue here. So let me summarize this for you because I looked at this issue before we started. Basically, this person is creating a form, and they're using the entity type, but they have a lot of client objects in the database. So they said they have over 15,000 client objects in the database, and so this is loading slowly. But they said it was working fine on Symfony 2.7.9. So in Symfony 2.7.9, it took 15 megabytes of memory. And then on Symfony 2.7.10, up here, suddenly it took 128 megabytes of memory. So that's the bug that they're reporting, okay? So normally what you would do at this point, and I'll show you why we're not gonna do this, is we would want to, if it's not clear that this is actually a legitimate issue, we might actually create a project that looks like this and just make sure that, yes, this is also happening for me on Symfony 2.7.10. There's a lot of value when somebody opens a bug for someone else to come to that issue and say, I also tried this and it also is a bug for me. Because a lot of times people have bugs or what they think is bugs, and it's really just something unique to their project. So as soon as 2 people are able to confirm a bug, that really means that, yes, this is probably a bug. But in this case, you can see Bernhard down here actually said this should be fixed by 17.990. Can you please verify it? So let's go over to that issue. Actually, it's a pull request. And you can see that somebody actually created a pull request to fix a performance regression, and that this was actually merged 9 days ago. So this issue really maybe should be closed. Bernhard said, can you please verify this? And that's really what we're waiting on. We're waiting to make sure that this did actually fix this person's issue. So in this case, one of the things that we could do to help this issue out is, why don't we just try to recreate his situation and then see if it is slow on 2.7.10, and then bring in this fix that was merged and see if it gets faster. So if we can verify that this fixed his issue, then we can comment on it down here, and then we can actually close this issue. Because that's what we need more than anything. We need real work to be done and actually close issues when they are actually fixed or decide that they're not a real issue or whatever. So let's get started here. So quite literally, we're going to build a new Symfony project to work on this. So I'm just in the sites directory. I have the Symfony installer. I'm going to say Symfony new. And this is issue 18011. So I'll say issue 18011. And then the second argument to the Symfony new command, you might not use it very often, is a version. So I'm going to make sure that we get 2.7.10 version of a project. And that will work its magic. There we go. This was faster before when I wasn't actually sharing my video. At least when it's downloading slow, we have a really beautiful progress bar that we can enjoy thanks to Javier. There we go, preparing project. Cool, all right, got it. And then I'm using PHP Storm, and I'm gonna go over here and switch into that directory. Yes, you can see I have a lot of projects. Okay, awesome. So we have a standard new Symfony project. It is, let's confirm, on 2.7.star, which is 2.7.10. If you looked in the composer.log file, you'll see that this is, in fact, 2.7.10. So the next thing we need to do is just build as quickly as possible a small project that's able to replicate what this guy has. So the first thing we're going to need is a client entity. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. If you like watching other people program, then you might enjoy this. First thing I'm going to do is enable the Symfony plugin for this project, because that is the best thing ever. And then I'm going to mark my src directory as a sources root, so that when I create classes in here, it automatically knows their namespace. All right, so client 3, new PHP class client. And then we'll add just, how about an ID and a name, because this does not need to be complicated. Then I'm going to bring in the use statement that we always have for doctrine. That's just a standard use statement that we always have for that. Now in PHP Storm, I can bring up the code generate menu, go to ORM class to generate that, and then bring up annotations and generate my annotations for that. And I'll also need a getter, a setter for my name field. Cool? All right, so we got that. Second thing is, let's actually set up our database so we can actually see if this is slow. And we'll just say issue 18011. And over here, I'll move into that directory. Doctrine database create, and then doctrine schema create. I'm going through this part fast because this is just standard Symfony stuff. So it might, hopefully it's interesting for you guys to see, but I apologize if I'm actually building this project a little bit quickly. It's not the main focus. Okay. And then what we need to do, so we have this client entity. We've created the table. We need to somehow fill in about 15,000 client objects so we can see if this is fast. A really quick and dirty way to do that is to copy your app.php file, or app_dev.php file to a play.php file. I'm going to remove this IP check up here, and I'm going to short circuit Symfony's booting process so I can get access to the container. So I now have a file that boots Symfony's container but doesn't actually process a request, and we can just write some code that will create those 15,000 client objects. So I'm going to get the entity manager via kernel get container get doctrine.orm.entity manager find equals a new client, and then we'll just do a for loop. For I equals 0, I less than 15,000, I plus plus. Find equals a new client. Client set name client, and we'll just put I on there to make it somewhat interesting. Then we'll do em arrow persist client. This is all code that I hope you guys are pretty comfortable with. And then we will flush that. And then we can just execute that from the command line. And that, of course, will take a couple seconds to run because creating 15,000 objects is a lot of stuff. So while that goes, let's go back over here. And the last step we need to do is actually to create a form that has these 15,000 objects on them. The form equals this create form builder. We'll just do it in the controller for simplicity. And let's just copy his line exactly. Just change this to @bundle: client. Perfect. Now, one detail that you may not have noticed if you actually read this issue more carefully, I didn't want to have you guys all take the time to read this specific issue, but he's not actually rendering the form. He's actually using it with the REST API. So that's actually something that I do with my REST APIs is I'll actually have forms handle the REST API data. So what he's actually saying is he's not rendering the form. He's only kind of submitting the form by getting data from like JSON data from the REST API. And when he does that in Symfony 2.7.9, it only loaded the one client object that was being sent via the API. But in 2.7.10, it seems to all of a sudden load all of the client objects, which is why it takes all this memory. And that's not really necessary, right? If you have an API and somebody submits the client ID 5, then it would be fine to just query for that one object and not have to query for all of them. Now, Iltar, you had a comment. Wouldn't it be faster to simply grab a fixture library, make a make a test with web test case and let the fixture library insert it? We'll also show you a very quick way to test it in the Symfony repository. That is also, I thought about that. Yeah, good suggestion, but I thought the play script was even kind of quicker and dirtier in this case because we don't really need to, we're not going to end up with a real test that we're going to be working with anyways. We just need to kind of verify that performance thing. It's kind of a weird thing because this issue is really verifying that the performance gets better. It's not that there is like something that works or doesn't work. So yeah, totally valid. It's something I thought about grabbing a fixture library for, but I just decided not to. All right. So let's go into default controller. So in other words, we don't actually need to render this form because he didn't render this form. We just need to fake a submit. Oops, actually let me finish this with get form. So this is basically what he's doing. He's submitting, and then he's just grabbing the JSON maybe that's coming into his API. So we can just fake that and say, okay, maybe somebody is sending something that looks like this. Okay. I'll even dump the form get data after this so you guys can see what that gives us. Cool. Let's check. Okay, our play script fixed. So we should have 15,000 things in the database. And then I'm just going to start the built-in web server. Remember, this is Symfony 2, so this is still app console, not bin console. Go over here. According to him, this should be slow. Oh, and I have, get out of here. There we go. And yeah, you can actually see 2100 milliseconds. So let's refresh again. That might go lower, 1200. If I refresh over and over again, yeah, it's taking about 1200 milliseconds. And you can see over here from my dumped object, like my form get data, it's working. It's actually returning a client object. So I submitted client with ID 1, and it is actually, in fact, returning the client whose ID is 1, the client object. But it is actually taking way too long of time. So last thing we need to do is, if we can get the fix for this into our project and verify that it gets way faster, then we know that this did, in fact, fix the problem. So this data here, okay, so hold on a second. Let's look at this. So this performance regression was merged. See down here it was merged. The question is, where was it merged to? Because remember, we're working with Symfony 2.7. So the question is, did Fabian merge this into the master branch? You know, is this available on the 2.7 branch, or is this on the master branch? Like, where was this actually merged to? One of the things you'll always see below a merge down here is a commit, a merge commit. And inside of here, there's a really cool sentence on top that's automatically generated on all of the merge commits. And it says, this pull request was submitted for the master branch, but it was merged into the 2.7 branch instead. And if you look back, you can see the original pull request was, in fact, created against Symfony's master branch. But Fabian decided that he wanted to merge it into 2.7 because it's actually a bug fix. And by the way, that's kind of an important thing to realize. When you create a pull request, which we'll do in a second, you have to choose which branch you want that pull request to go against. And if you're new to contributing in Symfony, it's maybe not always clear. Is this a new feature which should go on the master branch, or is this a bug fix on some other branch? Do your best, but ultimately it doesn't really matter, because whoever is merging this in, they can choose to change and merge into a different branch. So obviously in this case, Fabian wanted to merge it into the 2.7 branch so that the next release of 2.7, so 2.7.11, would contain this fix. Cool. So we need to basically have our project start using the latest 2.7 code and see if this actually fixes the issue. To do this, there's a few different ways you can do this, but the one that I like starts with us cloning the Symfony repository. And what we're going to do is clone the Symfony repository just anywhere on our computer, and then we're going to just replace the vendor/Symfony/Symfony directory in our project. We're going to replace it with a pointer to the actual cloned Symfony repository. And then in that cloned Symfony repository, we can just change which branch we're on, and we can play with exactly which code we're using behind the scenes. So if you don't have the Symfony code cloned, go ahead and go to github.com/Symfony/Symfony. Obviously, copy the value here, and go to your terminal. If you prefer kind of a Git GUI of some sort, that's totally fine. I have a little site/open source directory, and then just do git clone on that. I'm not going to hit that because I already did that before this. And the Symfony repository is huge, so that might take 5 minutes or even 10 minutes to clone. So I've already done this, and here's my Symfony directory right here. And you can see it's exactly what you'd expect on the repository. Cool. So I have Symfony itself cloned locally. And right now, you know, like usual, when you clone a repository, it's on the master branch. And master is the latest and greatest. So that's 3.1 dev right now, but it's always the latest and greatest code. So over here in my project, I'm going to open a new tab so that that web server keeps running. Could have also used the server start command, which wouldn't have taken up my terminal. I'm going to move into vendor Symfony. Let's just rename that to Symfony_original. Perfect. That way it's out of the way. And then because I'm on a Mac, this will also work obviously for any Unix-based systems, I'm just going to create a symbolic link from my newly cloned Symfony repository into this directory. If you are on Windows, by the way, that's cool. Just move it here or copy it here. The point is we basically want a Git repository in our vendor/Symfony/Symfony directory. So now vendor/Symfony/Symfony is actually this cloned Symfony repository, and we can play with the branches. And if I try my project right now, it's totally going to explode because I have a Symfony 2.7 project trying to use Symfony 3.0 code, because remember, we're on the master branch. Because what we really want to do, right, is actually switch to the 2.7 branch. So how about this? Let's do issue 18001 testing. So what this is going to do is create a new branch. The name does not matter, but it's going to be based off of the origin /2.7. So the latest 2.7 code up on Symfony, which should contain this. You could also call this branch just 2.7. It doesn't really matter. The point is we're getting our code locally here to where 2.7 is. Okay, perfect. And we can even do a little bit of extra double checking to make sure we have the right code. So see this doctrine choice loader? So if I go back to my project and do shift to do load by file name, of course I have two doctrine choice loaders. I want the one in, I can't tell which one's which. Let's open this one. There we go. I want to make sure I actually got the one in vendor Symfony, not vendors /Symfony _ original. In fact, let's hide that mark directory as excluded. That way it doesn't actually auto-load from that directory. And then there was a change made on line 149. So there we go. Okay, so we can see that we actually do have the updated code. So that's good. So let's go back. Refresh. So still 1500 milliseconds, but Symfony had to rebuild the container, so that may not be a real thing. Boom, there we go, 133 milliseconds. So all of a sudden, it's super, super fast. The only thing we changed was the Symfony version, which introduced this new optimization here. So I'm gonna go over here and say, well, I'm gonna go over here and give as much details as possible about what I did. Sometimes people will say things like this. That's not helpful. That means that you maybe just looked at the fix and said, yeah, I think that will probably work, but I didn't actually try it, so I'm just guessing. You have to give the core contributors as much confidence as possible in what you did. So instead, I'm going to say something like, I just created a fresh 2.7.10 project, a client entity, and added 15,000 rows. Initially, when rendering, not rendering, when submitting, 1200 milliseconds. Switch the latest 2.7 branch, which included I can confidently say this issue can be closed. And because somebody trusts me too much, I actually have the power to close an issue, but you won't have that power to close an issue. So I'm just going to say that, and somebody's going to be able to come here and very confidently close that. So this is a job well done. Like, that's actually huge. That was pretty easy, right, in a lot of ways, but you realize how long that took us? That just took us 15 or 20 minutes. So you just saved somebody on the core team potentially 15 or 20 minutes actually going through this issue that just needs to be closed anyway. So that's 15 or 20 minutes that they can spend actually working on something that's more complicated. Yeah, perfect. And you see Javier, who's part of the core team, just came through here, noticed my comments, and closed it. So it's like magic, guys. It was like, poof, there's things happening. How cool is that? I didn't even refresh the page. Open source, yeah. Okay, so that's on the issue side of things. So let's go to the next level and actually do a pull request for an issue. So I'm actually gonna, sorry, Javier, I'm gonna use one of these. You'll notice that Javier, who is awesome, created 5 kind of small issues that you guys can use today during the hack day to just kind of practice and get things done. So I'm actually going to use one of these. These are really simple issues, but they'll be good for us kind of seeing how to make a pull request. So here's basically the idea. you have found a bug or you want to add a feature to Symfony and you're ready to actually make a code change. So what does that look like? So that's the second part of contributing, right? The first part of contributing is looking at issues and reviewing them, or looking at pull requests and reviewing them. So another thing we could have done is gone to a pull request and maybe check the code on it, or check that it is actually something that fixes an issue or the feature works as expected. All right. So in this case, let's read here. This is a pretty simple one. So the problem to solve in the Symfony 2.3 branch, there's a command file, and the validate name method inside of there is missing some PHP documentation. So Javier is obviously like clearly spelled out a very nice issue for us to work on here. So let's see how we can do that. So first, let me kind of open up that command.php class and see what he's talking about. So let's clear things out. Hold on a second, guys. We have a visitor. There we go. Say hi, Molly. There we go. Yep, sorry. You may have heard some barking in the background a second ago. This is the intermission between issues and pull requests, and there we go. So Molly wanted to say hi. She usually sits back with me here whenever we're working on stuff. Anyways, there we go. I would say sorry for the interruption, but that was probably the best part so far. Oops, there we go. So command.php, here it is right here. He mentions it's in the Symfony component, console component, command, and then there's validate name. And there we go down here. Now, yeah, notice he actually says in the Symfony 2.3 branch, this is not documented. I'm on the Symfony 2.7 branch, and actually looks like it is documented, but let's see. It could just be because it actually was documented on the 2.7 branch, but not on the 2.3 branch. So let's do this again. Checkout -b. This is my clone of the repository. And validate name. So I'm just going to check out to the latest Symfony 2.3. Cool, and there we go. So basically it means that this was something that was validated, or there was documentation added later, but it wasn't added on an older branch, which in reality is maybe not a huge deal. This is probably something that we might not need to fix, but this is going to be a really good example for us. And usually, by the way, if there's a bug, the bug is usually fixed in the oldest version of Symfony. So it's pretty uncommon to find something where it's kind of a bug is sort of fixed in a later version, but not in an earlier version. But this is a perfect example. So Javier even gave us some good documentation up here, or we can actually go back to the 2.7 branch and just steal it. Go back to there we go. We'll go back to this issue because remember that's 2.7, and we're going to steal that, because isn't that what open source is all about? Creative stealing from smart people. Go back to our issue. Perfect. Okay, so actually let me kind of review, because there was an important thing I did here. So as soon as I realized I needed to do some coding, I went to my clone of the Symfony repository and I created a new branch that was based off of the version of Symfony that I wanted to make this issue, or sorry, against the branch that I needed to fix this issue on. Okay, and that was something I talked about earlier. Like there are a lot of branches inside of Symfony, 2.3, 2.7, 2.8, 3.0, master. And basically the idea is this: if you're adding a new feature to Symfony, you should be doing it against the master branch, and then it will come out in the next version of Symfony. So in this case, it would come out in 3.1. But if you're fixing a bug, then you want to make that against the oldest branch. In this case, well, the oldest maintained branch. In this case, 2.3 is still a maintained branch, so you'd make it against the 2.3 branch, okay? So usually it's master for new features, or 2.3 if you're doing a bug fix. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated when you have bug fixes for features that were introduced later. So sometimes you can have something where you're fixing a bug, but that bug is for a feature that wasn't introduced until Symfony 2.7. well, then clearly you would make that against 2.7. So make your bug fix against the oldest maintained branch that actually contains your bug. Now, Craig, you had a question. Craig said, could you please review the part where you replace the dependency with a clone? I actually have not done that. Craig, are you talking about this cloned repository where I replaced it with my fork? Or are you talking about the symbolic link in the vendor directory? I'm actually going to talk about both of them real quick. So real quick, I'm going to answer kind of both of those possible questions because they're both important parts. So backing up a second ago, when we were originally working on that issue, I just want to review that the way that I got our project, that form project we were building, the way I got that to use my Symfony clone is just by a symbolic link. So you can kind of rewind on the recording later if you missed that. Now, the second question that he may have been asking, which I'm going to cover in a second, is when you create a pull request in Symfony, there's this whole thing of like forking, using a forked repository on GitHub. I have not talked about that, so we're going to get that to there in a second. For right now, all you need to know is that you have the Symfony repository cloned on your computer, and you're creating a new branch against whichever branch on Symfony that you think your code should go against to. And again, if you get that wrong, no big deal, because we're going to make it right. We're going to merge it into the correct branch anyway, so just do your best. So anyways, we have a validate name docs thing against 2.3. Do we get status? And let's just add a little bit of documentation here. Git commit. We don't have a lot of rules on the commit messages. So again, don't worry about it too much. Just do your best. Importing the validate name. Hey, we don't have a lot of rules, but spelling things is usually good. Name method. Documentation. Great. So we got it. So that's easy enough. So that's really, so far, kind of like just making a change to any project. Now, one thing that we do not need to do with this pull request is test it. What I mean is, sometimes when you're actually making a change that's bigger than documentation, you might want to actually have a project that you can use to actually see if this is working, like a little test project. So if you did want to actually test and see if your feature is working, the way you do that is exactly the way we did it for reviewing that issue a second ago. You basically start a Symfony project like this, and then you just make sure that you replace your vendor/Symfony directory with your clone where you actually made that commit. So in fact, I already have it in this project. The fact that my vendor/Symfony directory is already pointing at this spot means that if I wanted to, I could actually refresh this page and it would be using my new code. So I could actually see if whatever changes I made were actually the changes that I wanted to make. Now, the only caveat, the only thing to worry about is you want to make sure that whatever project you started with is basically the same version as wherever you're making that feature. So we have an error here. Why do we have an error here? Because we originally downloaded a Symfony 2.7 project and we're trying to use it with 2.3 code. So what I would actually do is create a new Symfony project based on Symfony 2.3 so that you have any changes that need to be made for 2.3 in your project. And then I would do the same thing. I would symbolically link that to my clone, and then I'd be able to test it just fine. So that's just a nice trick. There are multiple ways to do that, but the symbolic link thing, guys, is just a really easy, nice way to be able to actually test your Symfony code. Now, there's a different thing about unit tests and actually running Symfony's unit tests, and I'll talk about that in a second. Obviously, in this case, we don't really need to run the Symfony unit test because we just made a documentation change. But in other situations, you will need to run the unit tests. Okay, so we've made our commit to our Symfony repository locally. So how do we make a pull request? 2 steps. First step, this is the forking step. Just make sure that you have a forked version of the repository. Okay, and I already do because I have contributed before. And then once you have your fork, go ahead and copy that SSH command again. And we're going to go over here and add a new remote. I'm just going to name the remote after me. Git remote add Weaver Ryan. So that now means that I can pull or push to origin, which is Symfony's repository, or my fork, Weaver Ryan, which is Weaver Ryan / Symfony. And of course, I can't actually push to the official Symfony repository. I can only push to my repository, which is why we did that. So now we can finally push to, that's right, push to my remote, Weaver Ryan, validate name docs. And that hopefully will not take too long. Now, Craig, I'm going to check your question. Craig asked a question, does the symlink mess up typical composer update for the whole project? I wouldn't do a composer update. Once you have that symbolic link in there, I wouldn't do a composer update. You could probably do a composer install if I remember correctly, okay? But I think a composer update might actually mess things up. So I usually symbolically link in my Symfony directory into my vendor temporarily just to try something. And then once I'm done, I will just delete that directory and then rerun composer install, because that will put the old directory back. It will download a new copy of the old directory. So it's probably best as a temporary thing. I'm not sure exactly if it would mess up. Okay, so we push that there. And cool. So as soon as I get back to github.com/weaverryan/symfony, GitHub has detected that I made a push to my my fork. And so it's already kind of knows like, hey, you probably want to make a pull request to the official Symfony repository. So you can just click this compare and pull request button, and it's going to take you over to the pull request screen. Or if you somehow miss that, you can always just say, let's see here, I think it's down on this. Let me refresh. There we go. You can always select your branch down here and hit new pull request, and that's going to do the same thing. So in case you don't see that. Okay, now, really important thing. What branch did we make this against on Symfony? And the answer in our case is we made it against the Symfony 2.3 branch. That's where we decided that our code should probably live. So we made this validate name docs based off of Symfony's 2.3 branch. So that means when you create the pull request, you want to change this to 2.3. If you mess that up, maybe not the biggest deal ever. We can probably fix it, but just try to keep that consistent. Else it looks weird. In fact, if I change this back to master, which is what it was at originally, you can see it looks wrong. There's 2 commits from Nicholas for some reason. You'll notice this because it just doesn't look right. So review down here. If it looks right down here, you're probably okay. As soon as I change this to 2.3, it all makes a little bit more sense. Okay, last step is, and this is actually really cool. We sort of require this little table of information here. As of a few weeks ago, when you create a new pull request, it automatically fills this in for you. So it's actually really easy. So branch 2.3, really that is just a question to make sure you thought about what branch this went against. This is a bug fix. We could have probably answer yes or no here. I answer yes, because it's not a new feature. New feature, no. Backwards compatibility breaks. Did we break backwards compatibility? No. Are there any deprecations? We did not deprecate any features. And do test pass. We haven't actually run them, but in this case, we can sort of guess because we didn't change anything, so we can guess that the tests are going to run. The tests are going to automatically run when we actually hit create pull requests. This is, again, just a way to actually think. Did you try the tests, or are you submitting a pull request? That's a little messy. And then there weren't any fixed tickets, and we do not need to worry about the documentation PR. All right, it's a moment of truth. Cool, there we go. Simple enough. Let's double check, make sure. Yep, looks good. My one commit, my file's changed. And you can already see that Travis is running. So if you want, you can go and see the builds in process, which are going to take a few minutes to run. So at this point, I usually go and have some more coffee or have a sandwich and basically wait for the test to pass in the background. One thing that you should look for is this fab.io thing. This is something that checks for your coding standards and suggests changes based on the coding standards if you messed something up. So actually, I'm not sure if I can. Here, let's mess up some coding standards here. Let's say that I actually change some code like that and put some spaces around the $ name. I'm going to put a little extra space around here. I'm messing up FabBot. How about this? Making FabBot angry. So obviously these are standards that do not just coding standards. I've basically violated the coding standards here. I'm going to push again to my Weaver Ryan branch. So by the way, this is the way that you would make additional changes to your pull request later. It's very easy. Just push again to your branch. And all of a sudden, I'm going to see a second commit there. And now you can see over here, it's got my extra changes. So down here, oh, question. Why did you state NA for fixed issue? Oh, good question. I didn't mention that. So I put NA for fixed tickets because because there is fixed tickets. Oh my gosh, I totally understand your question. Yes, that was a good catch on that. So I am actually fixing an issue here. Thank you for catching that. I was thinking that there wasn't an issue. I just found a bug that didn't have an issue, but there we go. Cool. Good catch. Obviously, that helps core contributors because they know what issue they can close after they merge this in. And by the way, if you want to get the core team even more excited about merging your pull request, link the fixed issue because we hate having open issues. So if we know merging your pull request is going to mean that we get to close an issue, then it's twice as fun to work on your pull request. Let's see here. Oh my gosh. Somehow my code, apparently my code still is happy with the coding standards. I am a little surprised by that. Somebody that knows more about the coding standards can figure out why that is. Let's mess up some other stuff then and see if that does it. It's not the biggest deal if we can't get it to work, but there we go. Oh yeah, good question. I'll mention the license in a second. So now you can see it's still running the test behind the scenes, but you can see that FabBot is angry with us. And if we click on that, there's this little coding standards thing. And this is really cool. You can just copy this curl command here, go over here, paste it, and it's just going to fix whatever problems we had. But you can see it basically undid the changes that I just made there. It detects most of the coding standards problems that you made, and you can fix them. So the moral of the story is just make sure that you, oops, push Weaver Ryan. There we go. So you check your pull request for the FabBot. That's a really easy way to make your pull request look like it's ready to merge. A question from Iltar, which is, what is the license option for? As far as I know, you cannot have a patch with a different license than the package/repository. And yes, so the license thing here is basically a read-only field. And the purpose of it is for you to effectively authorize that your pull request is the MIT license that Symfony uses. So this is a way, just kind of like a little legal thing, so that later somebody can't say, hey, I made a pull request to Symfony, but I didn't intend for it to have the MIT license. So what, here's a problem. So just to kind of cover, we make you state that this is your code is MIT license. So you won't ever change that. That's what that's for. And yeah, there's not like, you're not going to change that to Apache license or anything like that. Cool. Okay, the last thing that I want to cover is, so the only thing that we didn't talk about is actually running Symfony's tests, which is really important when you're actually making real changes. And you want to make sure that you didn't break something in Symfony, or maybe you added some new tests to Symfony. So running tests in Symfony is actually a lot like running tests in your projects. You just need to think of the Symfony repository itself like a project. So how do we normally run the test in our project? Well, normally we run PHP unit, and it looks in a tests directory. Sorry, let's look here. Normally, you just run PHP unit. It looks in a tests directory, or somehow it knows where the tests look in your project, and it just executes the tests, right? And this is really no different. The only kind of trick to know is that, like your individual projects have a vendor directory in there, and you get those vendor files by running composer install. It's the same thing with the Symfony repository itself. As soon as you want to run the tests, you need to actually run a composer install command, and that's going to kind of download everything into the vendor directory, and then you can actually run the PHP unit tests, which I should have maybe done before this, because I realize now that's actually going to take a little bit of time. You know what? I already have it in a different directory. Hold on, guys. There we go. I'm going to move over to the Symfony Real. That's a directory that I already have a clone of the Symfony repository, but I already have the vendor directory installed. Or sorry, I already did the composer install. Yeah, I'm on master. Let's run composer install. Let's see here. Let's see, why did I get that before I just kill my lock file? Did that make a difference for this? Let's try that. Oh yeah, it's weird because no. Well, anyways, let's ignore that. I had something weird set up with my system here. Somebody has a comment about why that might be happening. You can let me know, but basically that's minutia. It's not a real thing that I think would happen in most cases. So I already have a vendor directory because I've run composer install before. In this case, what I would actually do, if I was getting this weird error, is I would actually kill this composer.lock file and run composer install again. I don't want to do that right now because we don't have time for it to regenerate and talk to composer on my internet while I'm sharing video. So we're just going to keep things the way they are with my vendor directory that's already installed. So if you just run PHP units, it may or may not work. So let me give you guys the easy reality of running tests in Symfony. Running tests in Symfony is complicated. There are some tests that are kind of there are certain tests that it can only run maybe if you have certain PHP extensions installed. There's a lot of complexity to Symfony's code base, which is a good thing. There's a lot of complexity to Symfony's code base so that Symfony can support Windows, lots of different versions of Linux, different PHP extensions, and all that kind of stuff. So it means running the entire Symfony test suite is something that you can do locally, but it can be a little bit challenging to set up. So let me give you the easy way, the way that I actually do it in real life, and it's this. As far as running all of the tests, I let Symfony's continuous integration system do that. So I don't run all of the Symfony test suite locally. Instead, I make a pull request, and inside of here, you can actually look, and it's running. This one hasn't actually started yet. But once this actually gets going, it's actually going to run the entire test suite. And it's set up for all the complexities to do that really, really well. What I do is I actually run only the tests that are near the area that I've modified. So for example, if I was messing around with this command class, then I might at least run this command test to make sure that I didn't actually break something inside of the command class. So you don't have to run the entire test suite, in my opinion, but run as much as you can to make sure that your pull request is decent. But honestly, all the tests are going to run up on Symfony anyways. So the real benefit of being able to run the Symfony test locally is so that you can actually quickly see what failures you created and fix them. Whereas if you needed to wait for Travis to run, it's going to take you a long time to fix those issues because you will push to the repository, wait 5 minutes for Travis to run, see that a test failure happened, change something, push again, wait 5 more minutes. So you at least want to be able to run a single test. So let's actually try to run that one test. So quite literally, we're just going to go components, command, is that right? Sorry, so it should be console, not command. Tests, command. So that's it right there. Just like your project. Once you run composer install, you can just target the exact thing that you want to run by itself. So it's really, really simple. Also, there is one other thing that might come in handy sometimes. The entire Symfony code base itself is tested. So you see I run PHP unit in the root directory and it runs command test. By the way, just like your projects, the reason that PHP unit knows how to kind of bootstrap the autoloader is there's a PHP unit.xml.dist file inside of here, and that's what's being read. And it actually tells PHP Storm PHP units where the individual test files are and how to bootstrap and things like that. So if you're interested, there's some good stuff inside of here. So the entire Symfony project itself is tested, but also the individual components are tested. So one of the other things that you could do, if you knew you were working inside of the console component, you could just run the tests for the console components. So this is its own standalone project. You can see it has a composer.json directory. So if you ran composer install inside of here, and this probably won't finish very fast, but if you run composer install inside of here, it will download a vendor directory inside of the console component itself. And then we could do a very similar thing as before. We would run PHP unit from this directory. So we'd say PHP unit space, and then we would just say test/command test.php. Let's see, this might actually finish. I won't wait for it. So it's the same thing. You can just test things in kind of a smaller. Oh, there we go. Never mind. Good work. And there we go. Cool. Okay. Let's go back here. All right, guys. So that's basically it. Yeah, it took about an hour. Biggest takeaways here are please, please, please do know that going through the issues and being a triager, actually testing out bugs, testing out pull requests to make sure that they actually work. That's one of the best things you can do. That is the unsung heroes of Symfony that do that kind of work. And we have some really, really great people that do that work all the time. Pull requests, you guys saw the flow for the pull requests. If you have any questions, you can ask me or ask any of the other people inside of the Symfony dev chat room, and they're going to be really, really happy to help you out. Also, the Symfony core is probably the hardest thing to contribute to because it's really, really high quality. It's very complex. So don't forget about all the other bundles that exist out in the ecosystem. In some ways, I think that the most value can be given to the bundles that you guys use every day. So as you are developing in Symfony and you maybe use a bundle that helps solve a problem, probably when you use that bundle, you'll notice a few things that might not be right with its documentation, or you might notice some things that aren't as easy as they need to be. If you can contribute back to that third-party repository, that is huge. I think that one of the most important things that makes Symfony great is having a well-rounded, solid bundle ecosystem, because there are so many problems that the Symfony core doesn't solve and will never solve. And this is especially true now that we have so many different types of applications. We have traditional HTML web applications still. We have REST applications. We now have 10 different ways to authenticate with social authentication and JSON web token authentication. And all of these problems are solved by those third-party bundles. So we really need to do a lot of work to make sure that those third-party bundles themselves are really, really great. And like I said, as a bonus, it's usually easier to contribute to those bundles because they're smaller and simpler and there are less contributors. So you can be a hero on those third-party bundles as well. All right, so that's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. If you guys have any other questions, right now I don't think that there's. Oh, there's one I missed here. Yeah. One last question here was, please one doc PR field and a PR description must be filled in. That's basically for. I just realized I went off of that page. Let's find my pull request. There we go. There we go. This docs PR. You know who's really bad at doing documentation PRs? It's me, and I work on the documentation team. This is basically for new features. So you have to use your best judgment there, but you have to ask yourself, is this something that needs documentation or does it not need documentation? And usually it's basically, is this a new feature or is this not a new feature? And you can see here that obviously just changing the documentation on here doesn't require to have documentation. But that's actually a really important thing because the documentation team works independently from the core team. And it's very, very important that when a new feature or a feature change is made in the Symfony core, that the Symfony documentation team is notified. Because if that doesn't happen, if features are merged into the Symfony core without the documentation team knowing, then all of a sudden we end up with many, many features that don't have documentation or have wrong documentation because we never updated them. So this field right here is supposed to be that link. It's supposed to be the way where you actually make sure that you go and create an issue over there. Now it says doc PR, doc pull request. It doesn't need to be a pull request. So if you're not sure whether or not something has to have a pull request, or maybe you're still working on your feature and it's not done yet, so you don't really want to document it, just create an issue over there. Creating an issue in the documentation is almost just as good because we won't lose it then. So definitely an important field. I'm glad you asked about that. Awesome. So happy hacking. Find something to work on. Talk to us in the chat room, and let's get on it, guys. Like we have about 3 weeks or so until the Symfony feature freeze, which happens this time of the year at the end of March. So if you want to get something merged in or some annoying feature that's missing, then now is the perfect time to do it. All right, I'm gonna stop presenting here. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. I'll see everybody later sometime. All right, bye.